The Duke said, "Let her play at farming," and walked away for a year. By the time he came back, his tenants were paying rent to her. His mother had given her the ledgers. His best fields were turning a profit for the first time in a decade, and he had no idea what to do with any of it. The 23rd of March, 1811, was not a remarkable day at Wyndham Court, which was precisely what made it remarkable. The sky over Somerset had been threatening rain since dawn, and the lane from the village was soft with it. But by 9 o'clock the first of the tenants had arrived at the east door, and by 12:30 men were seated in the corridor outside the estate room, hats in their laps, waiting their turn without complaint. This had not always been the case. Harriet Colworth sat at the steward's table. It was a large table, older than the house's current state of disrepair would suggest it ought to be, good oak, with ink stains at the right corner where a series of men had pressed too hard with their pens. Harriet did not press too hard. Her penmanship was small and level, and she kept the ledger open to the correct page before the door even admitted the first man. "Mr. Croft," she said. Thomas Croft was 61, a tenant farmer with 30 acres on the east boundary, and a son who had a lame horse and a grudge about it. He sat down across from Harriet with the air of a man who had made his peace with something he had not initially expected. "Miss Colworth." He set his payment on the table, coin correct amount. "Roof held through February." "I'm glad to hear it," she made the notation. "And the lame horse?" Croft's expression shifted. "Better. The farrier came as you said." "Good." She closed that line of the ledger. "Your son will need to bring the east fence in before summer. I'll send someone to look at the posts." Croft nodded and rose. At the door he paused, turned back. "Will His Grace meet you this year?" Harriet looked up. "His Grace is in London." "Ah." Croft put his hat back on. "Well, same time next quarter then." He said it without irony, which was, Harriet reflected, the most instructive thing about the morning. The estate room door had been left ajar, not by accident. The Duchess Dowager of Wyndham did not attend the rent collection, which was appropriate, but she had a particular chair in the corridor outside that she had placed there herself 4 months ago, and she had positioned it with some care relative to the gap in the door. She sat in it now with her embroidery, which she did not appear to be doing. Eleanor Hartley was 63, small and upright, with the kind of face that had once been considered pretty and was now considered formidable, which she preferred. She had invited Harriet Colworth to Wyndham Court 10 months ago, in a letter that described the invitation as temporary and the position as companionable. She had not mentioned the estate ledgers. She had not mentioned the tenants. She had not mentioned that the steward had left in November, and she had not yet found a replacement. She watched Thomas Croft come out of the estate room and put his hat on, and she watched the next man, younger, nervous, a new tenant, go in. Through the gap in the door she heard Harriet say, "You're Mr. Alderton's son, sit down." The Duchess Dowager made a stitch. By 11 o'clock, 8 of the 12 had come and gone. Harriet had a list of 4 outstanding repairs, 2 requests she intended to decline, 1 request she intended to grant, and a note to herself about the Pendleton family in the northern field, who had paid in full but whose eldest daughter had looked thin when Harriet had ridden past on Tuesday, with Mrs. Reed, the housekeeper, who accompanied her on the longer estate rides as a matter of course. The Duchess Dowager had established this arrangement in the first month without making a point of it, and Harriet had understood why and accepted it with equal silence. She had not mentioned the daughter to anyone. She would ride past again on Friday. The 9th man, Joseph Marsh, came in already apologetic. Harriet set down her pen. "How much are you short?" Marsh was a large man made small by the occasion. He had the look of someone who had rehearsed a speech. "I can have the rest by the end of April, Miss Colworth. I swear it on my—" "How much?" 4 shillings. Harriet wrote it in the ledger. "I've noted it, end of April." Marsh blinked. "That's all?" "What else did you expect?" He did not answer that directly, which told her what he had expected. She had heard second-hand how the previous steward had handled short payments. She had not repeated those methods and did not intend to. "Thank you," Marsh said when he had recovered himself. He put his insufficient sum on the table. "You'll have the rest." "I know I will." He almost smiled. He stood up then. "My wife asks after you. She says to say the preserves were very good." Harriet had brought preserves to the Marsh household in January, when Mrs. Marsh had been unwell. She had gone with Mrs. Reed, as she always did, and Mrs. Reed had carried the basket, and Harriet had done the talking, and between them They had managed it without impropriety. She had not made a point of the visit. She did not make a point of it now. "Give her my regards," she said, and picked up her pen. The last of the tenants left at 12:30. Harriet closed the ledger, capped the inkwell, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the estate room. Through the window she could see the south lawn, or what passed for it, and beyond it the kitchen gardens, which were in markedly better condition than they had been 10 months ago. She had not done that herself. She had hired a competent woman from the village and made sure she had what she needed. This was, Harriet had found, the majority of the work, finding the right people and making sure they had what they needed and then stepping back. It did not seem complicated to her. It had seemed very complicated to the previous steward, whose correspondence she had read in the first weeks. Long letters to London, full of reasons why things could not be done. She gathered the ledger under her arm and went to find the Duchess Dowager. Her Grace had moved from the corridor chair to the morning room, where she was now genuinely doing her embroidery, or at least holding it in a way that suggested she might do it presently. "All paid?" she asked, without looking up. "All but 4 shillings, Marsh. He'll have it by April." "He will." The Duchess Dowager said it with certainty, as though she had seen the future. "Sit down, my dear." Harriet sat. She was comfortable in this room in a way she had not expected to be comfortable in a duke's house when she had arrived, tired and uncertain, 10 months ago. She had thought she would be a companion, that she would read aloud and fetch things and perhaps help with letters. She had thought it would last 3 months. "We should look at the north roof before summer," she said. "Yes." The Duchess Dowager made a stitch. "Nicholas is coming home." Harriet looked at her. "When?" "I wrote to him in February. He has not replied, which means he will arrive unannounced sometime in the next fortnight, looking for dinner and expecting everything to be exactly as he left it." Harriet considered this. She had formed her understanding of the Duke of Wyndham from the estate accounts, from the tenant's careful avoidances, and from his mother's equally careful descriptions. She had not formed a particularly warm picture. "I'll tell Mrs. Reed to have the ducal rooms aired," she said. "That would be sensible." The Duchess Dowager did not look up. "He won't be easy about it, you know." "About the rooms?" "About you." Harriet said nothing to this. "He has," his mother continued with the serenity of someone arranging flowers, "very fixed ideas about how things ought to be done. He is a good man, but he has been in London a year, and in London the ideas calcify quite quickly." "I shall try not to be in his way," Harriet said. The Duchess Dowager looked up then. She had dark eyes. Her son had inherited them, and when she chose to, she could deploy them with considerable precision. "That is not what I said." Harriet met her gaze. "No," she agreed, "it isn't." He arrived on the 28th. Harriet was in the kitchen garden when she heard the carriage, and she did not go in. She had a legitimate reason to be where she was. She was inspecting the cold frames with Briggs, the gardener, a taciturn Somerset man who communicated primarily in nods, and she was not going to disrupt a useful conversation to stand in a hall and welcome a man who had left his estate for a year without apparent guilt. She finished with Briggs. She washed her hands at the pump. She went inside. He was in the entrance hall with his valet and 2 footmen dealing with luggage, and he was taller than she had imagined, which was the first thing she noted about him. Dark hair, dark eyes, his mother's eyes, and a kind of contained energy that suggested a man accustomed to walking into rooms and having them rearrange around him. He was road dusty. He looked exactly like a duke who had been travelling since morning and had not yet been offered dinner. The Duchess Dowager was already there, and Nicholas Hartley was bending to kiss her cheek with a genuine warmth that revised Harriet's first impression slightly. "You didn't write," his mother said. "I never write." "You never write and then you expect dinner." "I always expect dinner." He straightened and looked past his mother and saw Harriet. There was a beat, brief, unremarkable to anyone watching, in which he took her in. She was not what he had expected. This was visible in his expression for exactly 1 second before he controlled it. "Miss Colworth," his mother said, "my companion." "So your Grace," Harriet inclined her head. "Miss Colworth." His voice was even. His eyes stayed on her a moment longer than strictly necessary, which she attributed to the surprise of finding a stranger in his house. "I was not aware my mother had engaged a companion." "I wrote to you in October," his mother said pleasantly. "I receive a great many letters." "And answer none of them. Yes, we have established this." She took his arm. "Come and have tea. You look like the road." He went, because one went where the Duchess Dowager directed. At the doorway he glanced back briefly. Harriet was already looking elsewhere. Dinner was at 7. Harriet changed into her second-best dress. Her best was reserved for occasions that had not yet arisen at Wyndham Court, and came down to find him already in the dining room, standing at the window with a glass of wine, and looking out at the south lawn with an expression she could not immediately read. He turned when she entered, his expression smoothed. "My mother is not down yet," he said. "She is rarely punctual," Harriet agreed and went to take her usual seat. He noticed which seat it was. She saw him notice. "You dine with her regularly," he said. It was not quite a question. "Every evening." He turned back to the window. "And in the mornings?" "We take breakfast together also." "A thorough companion." Harriet looked at him. There was nothing overtly offensive in the word. It was the manner of it, the very slight emphasis on companion, the mild bewilderment of a man who had expected a grey-haired woman with a book and found instead something that did not fit the category. "Your mother is very kind," Harriet said. "I try to be useful." "Quite." He took a sip of wine. He had the manner of a man who was being polite and was aware of being polite and would prefer not to have to maintain it indefinitely. "And have you been at Wyndham long?" 10 months. Something crossed his face. He had been gone 12. She watched him do the arithmetic. Harriet had arrived after he left then, which resolved something in his expression and created something else. "My mother wrote to me of you," he said carefully. "Did she?" "Very briefly." He set his glass down. "She mentioned a companion. She did not mention," he paused, chose, "the extent of your involvement in the household." "I have tried not to overstep," Harriet said. "No." He looked at her steadily. "I don't imagine you have." It was a remarkably precise piece of ambiguity. She could not tell if he meant it as reassurance or as something else entirely. The Duchess Dowager arrived, and the conversation moved to London. And Harriet ate her dinner and said very little, and watched Nicholas Hartley from across the table in the pleasant, well-lit way of a woman thinking about something else entirely. He caught her once. She did not look away immediately, which was a small act of honesty she permitted herself. He looked away first. The following morning he asked to see the estate accounts. Harriet brought him the ledger. She set it on the desk in the study, his desk which she had been using for the past 4 months, and opened it to the current quarter. He sat down. She stood to the side, which was the correct position for someone explaining an account to its owner, and waited. He read for some time. His expression moved through several stages: attention, concentration, something that might have been surprise, and then a long stillness. "These repairs," he said finally. "The barn on the Croft acreage, the roof on the Pendleton cottage. Both were necessary. Mr. Croft's barn had a structural issue that would have collapsed in winter. The Pendleton roof was—" "I can see what they are." He was reading still. "I am asking who authorized them." Harriet paused. "I did." He looked up. "You." "Your mother was consulted," Harriet said, which was accurate. The Duchess Dowager had been consulted and had said with characteristic economy, "Yes, do." "My mother," he repeated. "The steward's position was vacant. Someone had to—" "The steward's position was vacant because I had not yet appointed one." "Yes," Harriet said, "I know." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the ledger. "The accounts are correct." "Yes." "The repairs are—" He stopped, turned a page. "The quarterly balance is better than last year." "Yes." He closed the ledger. He did not say anything immediately, which she took to mean he was deciding which thing to say. "Miss Colworth." He turned to look at her fully for the first time since she had entered the room. His eyes were dark, his mother's eyes, but with less warmth in them now, replaced by something more guarded. "I intend to appoint a steward, a qualified man, within the month." "Of course," Harriet said. "In the interim," he paused, "you will continue as you have been, under my direction." "Under your direction," she agreed. He did not look satisfied by her agreement. She suspected he had expected some resistance, and the absence of it had wrong-footed him. It was a small and private pleasure, small enough that she was not proud of it, private enough that it did not signify. She took the ledger when he indicated she could go. In the corridor, the Duchess Dowager was not in her chair. She was standing a little further down the hall, examining a painting that she had examined every day for 40 years without apparent decrease in interest. "Well," she said, still looking at the painting. "He wants a steward," Harriet said. "He always wants a steward. He's been wanting one since he left for London." Harriet looked at her. "You didn't tell me that." "No," the Duchess Dowager agreed. She finally turned from the painting. Her expression was serene in the particular way of a woman who has arranged something to her satisfaction and is now waiting for others to arrive at the same conclusion. "I didn't, did I?" Nicholas Hartley had arrived at Wyndham Court with 3 intentions: to spend a week in the country, to appoint a steward, and to return to London. By the end of the first week, he had not appointed a steward, and he had not returned to London, and he was beginning to understand why both of these things had proven more complicated than anticipated. The difficulty with the steward was straightforward. Every candidate he considered was, on inspection, inferior to the current arrangement. He was reluctant to admit this even to himself, and completely unwilling to admit it aloud. He wrote 3 letters to London inquiring after recommendations, and received none that were satisfactory. The difficulty with London was less straightforward, and he chose not to examine it. He rode the estate on the second morning alone, which was how he preferred to examine things. Wyndham Court had 2,000 acres of Somerset countryside, some of it productive, some of it decorative, some of it in his father's time and his own early tenure, quietly falling into a category that could only be described as neglected. He had known this when he left. He had told himself he would address it when he returned. Someone had addressed it. The Croft barn was new timber, solid, well-joined. The Pendleton cottage had a roof that would see out several winters. The lane from the village had been resurfaced at the worst point, the point where a carriage wheel would catch every march without fail. He sat on his horse at the top of the east field and looked at it and was possessed by an emotion he did not immediately name. It was not gratitude. It was not quite resentment. It sat somewhere between the two, in the specific place occupied by feelings a man has when he has been proven not to be needed, and cannot decide whether that is a relief or an insult. He rode back. On the 3rd day he went to speak with Thomas Croft, who was the sort of tenant who would tell him the truth without being prompted. Croft met him at the gate to the east field, and they walked the boundary together, which was what Croft did with everyone, and Nicholas had learned to accept years ago. "Good winter," Croft said, which in Somerset meant a tolerable one. "The barn looks well." "Miss Colworth sent the carpenter in November." Croft said it plainly, without inflection. "Good man, didn't charge above what was fair." "She found him herself. Her and Mrs. Reed ride through the village most weeks. No people." Croft paused at the corner of the fence. "She found the farrier for my boy as well. Didn't ask to be thanked for it." Nicholas looked at the fence. "You speak well of her." "Everyone speaks well of her." Croft said this in the manner of a man reporting a fact. "She listens. Previous steward didn't. The one before him didn't either, come to that." A pause. "No offence to your grace." "None taken," Nicholas said, which was almost true. He rode back in a mood that had not improved. He passed the kitchen gardens and saw her there. She was talking to Briggs, who was a man of few words and considerable opinion, and who in 12 years had never given Nicholas more than a nod and a weather observation. He was currently showing Harriet something in one of the cold frames with what, in Briggs, amounted to enthusiasm. Mrs. Reed stood nearby with a basket, attending to something at the far end of the garden path, present as she always was when Harriet moved about the estate, with the comfortable invisibility of a woman who understood her function precisely. Nicholas did not stop. He went on to the stables, handed his horse to the groom and went inside for his afternoon, and told himself that this was of no particular interest. He found himself, on the 4th morning, walking toward the kitchen gardens with no clearly articulated reason for doing so. Harriet was not there. Briggs was, and gave him a nod and a weather observation. Nicholas looked at the cold frames, which were producing something green and promising, and went back inside. She was in the library. This surprised him. Not that she was in it, but that she was in it, in the way a person is in a room they consider their own, with a book open and her shoes off, and her feet tucked under her in the corner of the window seat. She heard him enter, and looked up, and did not notably move. "Oh, Your Grace," she said with perfect composure, as though this were a formal setting. He looked at her feet. She followed his gaze, and then she uncurled herself and put her shoes back on, and he was obscurely sorry to have caused this. "Don't," he said. She looked at him. I didn't mean to. You were comfortable. It was informal, she said. Her voice was level, but there was a quality to it that might, in a different woman, have been embarrassment. In Harriet, it seemed more like recalibration. I forget sometimes that the library is... She stopped. Yours, he offered? She looked at him steadily. Yours, she said. He sat down in the chair opposite the window seat. He did not know precisely why he sat down, rather than retreating as would have been sensible. What are you reading? He asked. She showed him the spine. It was a practical text on crop rotation, not the volume he would have expected a companion to choose. He picked up, from the table beside the window seat, the other book she had set down, a collection of essays on estate management. Light reading, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. I find it restful. Do you? He turned the essay collection over in his hands. You've been doing this a great deal. Reading. Managing. She considered her answer. Someone had to. Xiao keeps saying that. It keeps being true. He set the book down. He looked at her and she looked back at him with the particular composure of a person who is not going to be the first to speak. I don't mean to suggest, he said after a moment, that it was not well done. I didn't think you did. I mean to suggest... He stopped because he was not certain what he meant to suggest, which was unusual. He was generally a man who knew what he intended. So you mean to suggest, Harriet said carefully, that you find it irregular? Yes. And that a proper appointment will resolve it? Yes. Then I imagine it will. She picked up her book again. Whenever you find the right man. He remained seated. He did not know why. She read her book without appearing to notice. The essays, he said after a silence. Did you find them useful? She looked up. He thought he saw very briefly something surprised in her expression, and then it settled. The second volume more than the first. The first is somewhat theoretical. My father thought so too. He had not intended to say that. He said it and let it stand. He said the man who wrote it had never stood in a field in his life. Something shifted in her face. Toward him infinitesimally, the way a person shifts when they have been given something unexpected. The margins, she said. He frowned. She went to the shelf, found the first volume of the essays and brought it to him open to the third chapter. In the margin, in faded pencil, his father's handwriting. This man has never stood in a field. Nicholas looked at it for a longer moment than was necessary. I didn't know he'd written that, he said. I found it in the first week. She paused. I liked him for it. He handed the book back. She returned it to the shelf. He became aware, somewhere in this small exchange, that something had occurred between them that had not occurred before, something comfortable, and therefore faintly alarming. He stood. I'll leave you to it. Enjoy your afternoon, Your Grace. He went. He did not think about it. He was very deliberate about not thinking about it. On the fifth day it rained steadily, and there was nothing to ride out and examine, and he found himself mid-morning with the unaccustomed sensation of having nowhere in particular to be. The Duchess Dowager was embroidering with a satisfaction that suggested she had planned the rain. Come and sit with us, Nicholas, she said. He was in the doorway of the morning room. Harriet was at the writing desk, working through what appeared to be a stack of correspondence, not personal letters, but estate letters, the kind with seals and folded invoices. He sat. Letters, he said to the room generally. From the carpenter, Harriet said without looking up, and the supplier in Taunton, and a complaint from Lord Evesham's steward about the east boundary. The east boundary. He sat up. What about it? Lord Evesham's man believes the fence line has moved. It hasn't. I have the survey from 1803. She set the carpenter's letter aside and picked up the next one. I've drafted a reply. You'll want to sign it. She held it out without getting up. He crossed the room and took it. He read it. It was exactly the right tone, firm, not aggressive, citing the survey date, and offering a joint inspection as a courtesy that made the dispute appear to be Evesham's error without actually saying so. Where did you learn to write a letter like this? He asked. My father dealt in disputes. She was already writing again. I used to copy out his letters. He said it was a better education than any governess. He was right. He signed the letter and brought it back. She took it and folded it. His mother across the room made a stitch. He sat back down. He picked up the newspaper, which was 3 days old, and read it without any particular interest, and from time to time glanced across at Harriet, who was working with a focus that did not notice or did not acknowledge him. It was, he thought, a remarkably companionable morning. He did not examine this too closely. The crisis came on the 14th day. He was in the study. It had become, by a process neither of them had explicitly negotiated, their study, in the sense that Harriet continued to work there in the mornings, and he had taken to working there in the afternoons, when Mrs. Pendleton arrived at the kitchen door. He did not know she had arrived until he went looking for Harriet at noon, and found her in the kitchen, sitting across the table from a woman in her 40s who was trying very hard not to weep. He stopped in the doorway. Harriet looked up. "A moment, Your Grace." And then to Mrs. Pendleton with her full attention, "How long has he been like this?" "Since Tuesday." Mrs. Pendleton pressed her hands flat on the table. "He won't eat. The apothecary in the village said it was a fever, but it's been 4 days now, and I don't know. I'll send for the physician from Taunton." Harriet was already standing. "Today, do you have enough wood?" "For now." "I'll send Briggs with more tomorrow." She moved to the door, saw Nicholas in the doorway, and said in a lower voice, "The physician, Dr. Marsh, in Taunton. Do you know him?" "By name." "He's good with children. Mr. Pendleton's youngest is the one who's ill." She held his gaze. "I can send one of the footmen, but a letter from you would reach him faster." He was already reaching for words. "I'll write it now." "Thank you." She moved back to Mrs. Pendleton. He went to the study. He wrote the letter. He sent it with the fastest horse. He was halfway up the stairs when he heard Harriet in the entrance hall giving instructions to the cook about a basket, bread, preserves, the good candles, to be sent to the Pendleton cottage. And then, a moment later, her voice and Mrs. Reed's confirming they would go together in the morning to see Mrs. Pendleton settled. He went back to the study. The physician arrived from Taunton the following afternoon. The child's fever broke within the week. Nicholas knew this because Harriet told him and because he had asked. He had not expected to ask. On the 17th day he proposed to ride the South Fields, and Harriet, without being asked, said, "I'll come." He did not object. They rode with Mrs. Reed at a discreet distance behind them, close enough for propriety, far enough for conversation, in a silence that was not uncomfortable. The specific silence of two people with a shared destination and no particular need to perform sociability. The South Fields were the furthest point of the estate, and the condition of the hedgerows told him why she had wanted to come. "The Weston family farms this section," she said when they stopped at the boundary. 3 generations. The grandfather started to let it go in the 90s. Robert Weston has been trying to manage it short-handed since his father died." "Short-handed?" "He can't afford more men. His rent is low because the condition of the land is poor, but the condition of the land is poor in part because his rent is low, and therefore he has no capital." She looked at the field. "It's a familiar circle. What would fix it?" She turned to look at him. "1 season's rent forgiven and a loan for labor. He'd have it back in 3 years. That's a significant outlay. Against a tenancy that will still be producing in 30 years, yes." She held his gaze. "It's your land, Your Grace. I offer the analysis." He looked at the field. The hedgerows were badly overgrown, not catastrophically, but enough to lose ground every year if left alone. "Arrange it," he said. Harriet was quiet for a moment. "I'll draw up the terms." They rode back. Mrs. Reed kept her distance, with the comfortable tact of a woman who has learned the difference between necessary presence and unnecessary intrusion. He helped Harriet dismount at the stables. It was automatic, the courtesy of it, and he had his hands at her waist before he had consciously decided to, and then she was on the ground, and they were briefly very close, and she looked up at him with an expression that was entirely composed, and said "thank you" in a voice that was entirely level, and he stepped back. "Of course," he said. He walked back to the house, certain that nothing of significance had just occurred, and not entirely sure he believed this. That evening the Duchess Dowager said over dinner, "I thought you were returning to London this week." Nicholas looked at his mother. Harriet looked at her plate. "I haven't finished with the steward question," he said. "Ah," his mother said, and made no further comment. Harriet, across the table, reached for the salt cellar, and he passed it before she asked, and she took it and said "thank you" in exactly the same voice she had used at the stables. He drank his wine. The Western arrangement required a visit to the Southfield that Harriet had proposed to manage with Mrs. Reed, and Nicholas arrived at the stables that morning to find her already mounted. "I was going to—" he started. "I know," she said. He got his horse. Mrs. Reed, informed by a footman of the revised party, appeared at the yard gate with a practical expression and joined them without comment. Robert Weston received them at the farmhouse gate. He was 40-something, lean with the particular dignity of a man who had been embarrassed by necessity for long enough to have made his peace with it. He shook Nicholas's hand. He then looked at Harriet. "Miss Colworth." "Mr. Weston." Her voice was warm without being patronizing. "We've spoken to His Grace. He's agreed to the arrangement." Weston looked at Nicholas. Nicholas inclined his head. Weston was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than was socially conventional, and then he said, "I won't forget it." He said it to both of them. Nicholas thought it was the more honest version. He let Harriet lead the conversation. He watched her with the Southfield tenant and tried to be objective about what he was watching, and could not quite manage it. She knew Weston's 3 children by name. She knew which field had the best soil. She knew where the fence line was weakest, because she had ridden it in the autumn and noted it, specifically, so that she could tell the right person at the right moment. On the way home, she said, "He'll have it turned around by autumn." "You seem certain." "He's been managing without resources for 4 years. Give him the resources and he'll be efficient with them." Nicholas rode for a moment. "You think well of people." "I think accurately about people," she said. "It happens to look like thinking well of them because most people, given what they need, do the right thing." He looked at her. She was watching the road ahead, her profile steady against the Somerset afternoon. "You didn't think well of me," he said. He had not meant to say it. She looked at him then. He waited for the careful deflection. "No," she said, "not initially." "And now?" She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the road. "You came to the South Field," she said. "You didn't have to." He said nothing. It was the most restrained compliment he had ever received, and it meant more to him than any of the elaborate ones he had collected in London. They rode back to Wyndham Court in the silence of 2 people who have said enough and know it. The 23rd of June, 1811, was the midsummer rent collection. Nicholas had not planned to attend. He had sat in the study the night before with no good reason to be in Somerset at all. He had come for a week and spent 3 months, and the steward question was still unresolved, and his correspondence from London was becoming pointed. And he had told himself he would observe briefly, and then write the necessary letters. He rose at 8, he dressed, he went downstairs. The tenants were already in the corridor. Mrs. Reed gave him a look that he could not quite read, not surprise, but something calibrated, and he went to the estate room where Harriet was at the table, the ledger open, the inkwell uncapped. She looked up when he entered. Something in her face rearranged itself, not alarm, but a different quality of attention. "Your Grace." She started to rise. "Don't." He took the chair to the side of the desk, not behind it, to the side. "Continue." She looked at him for 1 moment, then called for the first tenant. It was Thomas Croft. Croft came in, stopped when he saw Nicholas, and then, this was the thing Nicholas noted and kept noting for the rest of the morning, looked past him to Harriet. "Miss Colworth." He set his payment on the table. "Mr. Croft," she made the notation. "The east fence?" "Done." "Good." She closed that line. "Is your son's horse well?" "Better, thank you." Croft left. He had nodded to Nicholas, correctly, respectfully, but the nod was what one gave a room, not what one gave a person. The next man came in. The same. A glance at Nicholas and then the eyes settling on Harriet, on the ledger, on the business of the morning, as though Nicholas were a respected piece of furniture. He sat through it. He watched Harriet take each payment, make each notation, ask each specific question, different for every man, drawn from some particular knowledge of their circumstances he could not have replicated. Joseph Marsh, now paid in full, received a straightforward transaction and a remark about his wife's recovery. Young Alderton received a remark about his fence post and a piece of advice about the winter wheat that Alderton received with the gravity of a man taking instruction from a superior. Alderton, on his way out, nodded to Nicholas. Nicholas was quite certain the young man did not know his name. When the last tenant had gone, Harriet closed the ledger and looked at the window and then at Nicholas, and he saw that she understood exactly what he had just seen. "All paid," she said. Her voice was neutral. "Yes," he stood. "I noticed." She waited. "They look to you," he said. She said nothing. "Not disrespectfully, they are respectful, but they look to you for—" He gestured at the ledger, at the room, at whatever it was. They know me, she said carefully. I've been here. When Mr. Pendleton's child was ill, when Marsh was short, when the western fence, she stopped. They know me because I've been here. And I have not. The words sat there. She did not offer him the comfort of disagreeing. No, she said. He picked up his gloves from the chair. He looked at the rent table, at the ink stain on the right corner, at the chair where she sat every quarter. I intend to appoint a steward, he said. I have a letter from London recommending a man. I'll arrange an interview. She nodded. Of course. He left the room. He went to his mother. The Duchess Dowager was not in her corridor chair. She was in the drawing room, sitting straight-backed by the fire with her embroidery untouched in her lap, as though she had been waiting to be found. I'm appointing a steward, Nicholas said. There's a man in Bristol recommended by Melford. His mother looked at him. Lord Melford's steward robbed him blind for 6 years. Everyone in the county knows it except Lord Melford. Not the same man. No, just Melford's judgment. She paused. Sit down, Nicholas. He did not sit down. The situation as it stands is untenable. Is it? A gentleman's daughter managing 2,000 acres is irregular. He stopped. It is remarked upon. It is remarked upon, his mother agreed, which was not a denial. Mrs. Morley mentioned it to me in April, very delicately. She meant it kindly. She looked at her embroidery. I told her that Miss Colworth was performing her duties as my companion, that I rely on her a great deal given my health, and that the estate work was supervised at all times by Mrs. Reed, who is entirely respectable and has been here 20 years. She paused. Mrs. Morley seemed satisfied. Nicholas looked at his mother. You managed it. I have been managing it since October. She met his eyes. Miss Colworth's reputation is intact, Nicholas. I have seen to it. The question of whether the arrangement is irregular is separate from the question of whether it is harmful, and the answer to the second question is no. He was quiet for a moment. What the tenants think. Is that Wyndham Court is well run, which it is. She set her embroidery aside. The question is what you intend to do about the space, not about Miss Colworth. He looked at the fire. The steward will resolve the space. The steward, his mother said in the tone of someone making a point they expect to make only once, will not fix the space. The space exists because you have been absent. You are, I notice, no longer absent. He said nothing to this. Think carefully, his mother said, before you give the interview to the man from Bristol. He left her, went upstairs, stood at his bedroom window and looked out at the south lawn, in better condition than March, and the kitchen gardens, and the lane to the village now passable in all weathers, and thought carefully. He did not send the letter about the Bristol man. He did not send it that afternoon, and then it was evening, and then it was dinner, and at dinner Harriet was quiet in the way she had been quiet since the morning, not uncomfortable, not withdrawn, but contained, as though she had drawn herself back to a safe perimeter. He had noticed this. He noticed it again across the table. The Alderton boy, he said to no one in particular. Harriet looked up. Yes. He didn't know who I was. She was quiet for a moment. He's new, he'll learn. That's not... He stopped. I'm not troubled by it, I'm interested in it. He looked at her. What would it take, do you think, for him to know who I am, in the way he knows who you are? Harriet put down her fork. Time, she said. Presence. Being the person who answers when something is wrong. And if I were that person? She held his gaze. Then he'd know who you are. The Duchess Dowager said nothing at all, which was by this point as informative as a speech. He began to ride with her in the mornings. It had been her habit, always with Mrs. Reed at a proper interval, as it had been from the beginning, and he simply appeared at the stables on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday without announcement, and she did not ask him why. The mornings were useful. He learned things he had not known about his own land. The boggy corner in the east field, the apple orchard on the western boundary, untended so long it had begun to recover on its own, the family of Romany travellers who camped in the low field every summer, and had done so for 40 years. Harriet had visited them in May with Mrs. Reed to establish a mutual agreement about boundaries. Have you negotiated with them? He said, riding back from the low field. I brought bread and spoke to the elder. Mrs. Reed came. She paused. He told me about the apple orchard as a matter of fact. His grandmother remembered when it was productive. We should restore it. She looked at him. He had said we without noticing. It would take 2 or 3 seasons, she said carefully. Then we should start this autumn. She looked back at the road. He looked at the back of her head, which was the only option available to him. On Friday morning he rode back through the kitchen garden and paused to speak to Briggs about the cold frames. And Briggs, for the first time in 12 years, spoke back in full sentences. Nicholas chose not to analyze this. On the last evening of June he found her in the library again. This time he knocked, though it was his door which he recognized as unusual, and she looked up and did not look surprised. He sat in the chair. He was not going to look at her feet because she was wearing her shoes. "The Bristol man," he said. "I haven't sent the letter." "I know," she said. "I see the post." He absorbed this. And it's your letter to send or not send." She closed her book around her finger. "I have not been waiting for it with relief or dread. I have been working." "I know you have." He looked at the shelves, at the essay collection. "I want to ask you something, and I would like you to answer honestly rather than carefully." She opened her book and put it down. She was giving him her full attention. "Do you want to stay?" he said. She was very still. "At Wyndham," he clarified. "Not as a companion, as what you are. The person who knows where the fence needs mending and which tenant is 2 months from difficulty and how to write a letter that stops Lord Evesham from making a fool of himself." She looked at him. He did not know what she was looking for. "Is that a formal inquiry?" she said. "It is an honest one." She was quiet for a moment. "If I say yes, what does that resolve?" "Nothing immediately." He held her gaze. "It tells me something, though." She looked at the window. The evening was long. Midsummer, the sky still pale, and outside he could see the south lawn and the beginning of the kitchen gardens. "Yes," she said. She said it to the window first, then looked back at him. "Yes, I want to stay." He nodded. He should have left then. He had his answer. He sat instead for another moment, in the particular light of that long June evening, with the crop rotation text on the cushion beside her, and his father's essays on the shelf, and everything outside the window in better condition than it had been a year ago. "Good," he said. He stood up. At the door he paused. "The apple orchard, if we start in October—" "I was looking at it last week," she said. "I have some thoughts." "So do I." He went to find paper. The first week of July brought rain that had no intention of stopping, and with it a letter from London that Nicholas could not ignore. He read it at breakfast. Harriet was across the table with her tea and a list of autumn planting considerations she had drafted the previous evening. His mother was not yet down. He read the letter twice, folded it, and set it beside his plate. "You'll be going to London," Harriet said. She had not looked up from her list. "How did you know?" "Oh, your face." She made a note on the list. "And it's been 3 months. I wondered when it would arrive." He looked at the letter. It was from his solicitor, and from a friend whose name he trusted, and between them they conveyed a message that was perfectly polite and entirely clear. His presence in London was required. His affairs were gathering dust, and several people of consequence had begun to make remarks. "A fortnight," he said. "Perhaps 3 weeks." "Of course." She turned the list over and began writing on the back. He watched her write. "I'll be back before the quarter rent." She looked up at this. "I can manage the quarter rent." "I know you can." "Then—" She stopped. "Then why does it matter whether you're back for it?" He held her gaze. He was aware that he had said something that revealed more than he intended, and that she had heard exactly what he had not said. "I would prefer," he said carefully, "to be present." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her list. "Then I'll have the ledger ready." He drank his coffee. The rain against the window was steady and had no opinion about any of it. He left on the Thursday. The Duchess Dowager saw him off with the serenity of a woman who knows the outcome of something and is content to wait. Harriet stood in the entrance hall and said, "Safe journey, Your Grace," in a voice that was entirely appropriate, and he got into the carriage and did not look back at the house. He was in London for 14 days. He found it louder than he remembered and the company thinner, though the company was the same company as always. He attended 2 dinners and a card party and a reception, at which a Mrs. Halford, recently widowed and positioned by her aunt with unmistakable intent, spoke to him for 40 minutes about the pleasures of the Surrey countryside. Mrs. Halford was handsome, well-dressed, and said nothing of interest. He thought once, sitting in his solicitor's office while papers were placed before him, of Harriet's letter to Lord Evesham's steward. The one that was firm without being aggressive, precise without being cold, and had cost her perhaps 15 minutes to compose. He signed the papers. He came back on the Thursday evening, 2 weeks to the day. He arrived to a house that was lit and settled and smelled of beeswax and whatever the kitchen had been doing with the summer herbs, and it occurred to him, as he handed his coat to the footman, that he had thought of it, in London, as home. And he had not thought of it that way before he left in April of the previous year. Harriet was in the morning room with his mother. They were both reading. The scene was so thoroughly domestic that he stood in the doorway for a moment. "You're back exactly when you said," his mother said. "I said a fortnight." "You said perhaps 3 weeks. There's a distinction." She set down her book. "Come and sit." Harriet had looked up when he entered, and then looked back at her book. He sat. The evening resumed. The argument happened on a Saturday. They were in the study. It was their study by now, unambiguously, and he was writing the letter to the Bristol steward, which he had finally decided to send, and Harriet was going through the accounts for the apple orchard restoration. He was writing the letter because he had decided in London that the situation required resolution. Harriet could not continue indefinitely in a position that was not formally hers. It was not fair to her. A proper steward would allow her to return to what she had nominally come to do. He had been very clear-headed about this in London. He was less clear-headed now that he was in the same room as her. She looked up when she heard the scratch of his pen stop. "What are you writing?" she asked. "The letter to Bristol." She looked at him. "I see." He put the pen down. "It's the correct thing to do." "I imagine it is." She looked back at the accounts. "It's your estate." "That's not why." She looked up again. "I'm not writing it because I want you gone," he said. "I'm writing it because you've been here 10 months in a position that has no name, that has no protection. If I sell the estate, if I—" He stopped again. "You deserve something that is properly defined." She was very still. "You've made yourself indispensable," he said, "in a house that isn't yours, and I don't know what to do with that." The room was quiet. Outside, the July afternoon went on without interest. "You left?" she said. Her voice was not raised, it was quieter than usual. "I know. The estate was failing. Not catastrophically, not beyond recovery, but failing. The steward left in November. Your mother was here alone." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't plan any of it. I came as a companion. I stayed because it needed doing, and then I—" She stopped. "And then you what?" he said. She looked at her hands. "And then I stopped thinking of it as temporary." He was quiet. "So when you write that letter," she said, "I understand why, I do, but please don't—" She stopped again. "Please don't what?" She looked up at him. For the first time in 3 months, the composure had thinned enough that he could see what was behind it. Not distress. She was not a woman of easy distress, but something honest, and therefore exposed. "Please don't pretend it's for my benefit," she said. "It may be the right thing, it may be exactly the right thing, but say it plainly." He was out of the chair. He did not entirely know how. "Plainly," he said. He was on his feet, not pacing, standing the way a man stands when he has reached the edge of a prepared position. "Plainly, then. I came back from London expecting to feel like the Duke of Wyndham. I sat at the rent table, and the tenants looked past me. I rode my own land and found it better tended than I left it. I have spent 3 months." He stopped. "3 months," she said. "Finding you." He looked at her directly. "Finding it, I don't know what to do with it, any of it, the estate, or—" He looked at her. "Any of it." It was the most honest thing he had said in months. She looked at him for a long moment. "The letter," she said finally. "Yes." "If you send it and he is a good man, the estate will be well managed, that's what matters." "Is it?" She held his gaze. "Isn't it?" "No," he said, "not entirely." The afternoon went on outside the window. Inside the study, something had been said that could not be unsaid, and neither of them moved until the clock on the mantel reached the quarter hour, and the small chime of it broke the moment like a stone through water. He sat back down, he looked at the letter. He folded it. He put it in the drawer. He did not send it that day, he did not send it that week. He rode out with her on Monday and said nothing about the study. And she said nothing about the study, but the quality of the silence between them had changed, warmer and more careful, the way silence becomes when 2 people are aware of the same thing and are deciding separately what to do about it. On Wednesday, they inspected the apple orchard together. The trees were old, overgrown, and had the slightly defiant air of things that have survived without assistance and resent having to accept it. Harriet walked the rows with the authority of someone who has already made up her mind. 40 trees, she said. Maybe more under the elder growth. We'll know when we clear it. And you think they're worth saving? She turned to look at him. The orchard was in the western light and her expression was open in the way it had become since the study. The composure still there, but not as a barrier, as a choice. Yes, she said, things that have survived that long usually are. He was quite certain she was not only talking about the orchard. He looked at the trees instead, and she walked to the far end of the row, and he watched her go, and thought that if he were writing a letter to anyone about what had happened to him in the past 3 months, he would not know where to begin. His mother found him in the library that evening. She did not knock, which was her right, and she sat in the window seat, Harriet's seat, with her hands folded. Well, she said. I don't require your observations, he said. I haven't made any. She looked at the shelves, at the essay collection. Your father's notes. She found them in the first week. His mother smiled. He would have liked her very much. He sat with that. What are you afraid of? His mother asked. Not unkindly. He thought about it honestly. That I have mistaken proximity for something more significant. His mother considered this. And have you? He looked at the shelf, at the essay collection with its marginal notes. No, he said. His mother stood. Then I suggest you stop writing letters to Bristol and do something useful instead. She left him with the library and the books, and the particular evening light that fell across the window seat. He was done after the library with pretending. Not done carelessly. He was not a man who abandoned caution all at once. But the pretending was finished. The pretending that the steward was the problem. That propriety was the problem. That 3 months of riding Somerset lanes at 7 in the morning was ordinary behaviour for a man with a London life and parliamentary obligations. On Thursday morning, he came to the study before Harriet and had the apple orchard figures open on the desk when she arrived. She stopped in the doorway for only a moment before coming in. I thought you might want to look at the timeline, he said. I was going to propose starting with the South End, she said, and came to stand beside him at the desk. They worked through it for 2 hours. He asked genuine questions, she answered them and asked her own. At the end of it, the orchard had a plan and a budget and a first planting list. After harvest, she said, gathering the papers. October, certainly. I'll be here in October, he said. She looked at him. He had said it plainly, as she'd asked him to. Good, she said. He began to appear at things he had previously not appeared at. He appeared at the weekly meeting with Mrs. Reed, which Harriet attended as a matter of course, and he sat and listened and twice offered a view that Mrs. Reed received with the polite recalibration of a woman updating an expectation. He appeared at the Alderton farm on a Tuesday, when Harriet was there to check on the new tenants' first summer. Alderton, who had not known his name in June, shook his hand with the recognition of a man who has been told something relevant. Your Grace, Alderton said, and then looked between Nicholas and Harriet with the frank assessment of a young man without the social training to conceal it. On the ride home, Nicholas said, he's working it out. Give him a week, Harriet said. He'll have decided something by then. Something accurate, do you think? She rode for a moment. More accurate than not, she said. The letter came from London on the 12th of August. It was from Lord Carew, a man of consequence whose opinion moved in circles that mattered, and it was addressed to Nicholas with the warmth of long acquaintance and the precision of someone who has chosen his words carefully. It congratulated Nicholas on his return to Wyndham, and expressed between pleasantries a particular kind of curiosity, the kind that was not curiosity at all. It is remarked in certain quarters, Carew wrote, that the management of your estate has fallen to a young woman of no particular connection. I have defended you, naturally, as a man who knows his own business. I mention it only in the spirit of friendship, and with the confidence that you will know best how to address the matter before it becomes a subject of wider comment. Nicholas read it twice. He folded it and went to find his mother. She read it without surprise. I expected something of this sort in June, she said, returning it. Rather later than I anticipated. It will get worse if I do nothing. Yes. And if I do something, He stopped. His mother looked at him steadily. That depends entirely on what you do. He left her and went to the study. Harriet was not there. He sat down at the desk with Carew's letter and thought about what it would mean, socially, to marry a country gentleman's daughter who had been working, however discreetly, as a land steward in all but name. He thought about it with the honesty it required, which was not comfortable. It would cost him something. Not ruin, he was a duke, and dukes survived greater irregularities, but it would cost him the seamless social fabric he had worn without thinking. There would be people who did not call, invitations that did not arrive, remarks made at a distance. He thought about Mrs. Halford in London, whose conversation had been 40 minutes of nothing. He thought about Harriet's letter to Evesham's steward, and the apple orchard, and the margin note he had not known his father had written. He wrote back to Carew. The letter was brief and direct, and said that the management of Wyndham Court was entirely his affair, and that he intended to resolve the matter of Miss Colworth's position in the very near future, and that he was grateful for Carew's friendship. He sent it before he could revise it into cowardice. The Duchess Dowager's birthday was the 15th of August, and she received it with the equanimity of a woman for whom birthdays had long since ceased to be events. Nicholas had arranged a small dinner, the vicar and his wife, the Morley family from the next estate, Harriet. He had arranged it with Mrs. Reed without consulting anyone, and he noticed this only after the fact. His mother noticed it immediately. He could tell by the way she said nothing about it. The dinner was good. The vicar was comfortable in the way of clergymen too long settled. The Morleys were pleasant, and Mrs. Morley spent a portion of the evening speaking with Harriet about the kitchen gardens with an interest that appeared genuine. Nicholas watched them from across the table. Harriet in a social setting was a different kind of capable than Harriet at the rent table, quieter, selective, as though she kept the full version of herself for places where it would be used properly. After dinner in the drawing-room, Mr. Morley spoke to him in the frank way of a neighbouring landowner. "Miss Colworth's been here some time now." 10 months, Nicholas said. "Does well by the estate." Morley was not being careful about it, which meant he did not think he needed to be. "My own man spoke to Croft last month, said it was the best-run stretch of land in the county." "I believe it," Nicholas said. Morley gave him the look of a man who has said what he meant, and is waiting to see if it has landed. "Good woman," he said, and moved off toward the port. Nicholas looked across the room. Harriet was with his mother now, both in conversation with the vicar's wife, and Harriet was saying something that made the vicar's wife laugh. His mother caught his eye across the room and looked away, very deliberately. He found a moment after the guests had left. The house was settling, servants through the last tasks of the evening, his mother having gone up, and Harriet was in the entrance hall with her shawl. "A moment," he said. She stopped. He had rehearsed nothing. "I'm not going to send the letter to Bristol," he said. She looked at him. "I haven't sent it because the estate doesn't need a steward from Bristol. The estate is fine. The estate is better than fine." He looked at her. "You know this?" "Yes," she said. "And I haven't sent it because—" He stopped. He was accustomed to being articulate. He found, standing in his entrance hall at 10:30 in August, that the articulate version was insufficient. "Because," she said quietly. "Because I intend to marry you," he said. "And a man cannot send a letter replacing his wife's function with a steward from Bristol. It is in poor taste." The entrance hall was very quiet. She stared at him. He watched her face move through something. Not alarm, not refusal, but a person recalibrating every assumption they have held for months simultaneously. "That," she said finally, "is the least romantic proposal I have ever heard." "It isn't a proposal," he said. "It's a statement of intent. The proposal will be better." She looked at him for a long moment. Her composure had not quite reassembled itself. He found he preferred her like this. "You think this," she said. "You have decided this." "I decided it in London. I have been deciding it since June." He held her gaze. "I am stating it now because you asked me to say things plainly." She was quiet. "I don't have to say anything tonight," he said. "I know I don't." She looked at him, then at the floor, then back at him. Wyndham. It was the first time she had used his title as a name, the way one uses a name, not a designation. It was, for the moment, enough. "Yes," he said. "I need to think," she said. "Not because I—" She stopped. "I need to think." "Think," he said. She went upstairs. He stood in the entrance hall alone with the house settling around him and felt very awake. She thought for 2 days. He gave her those 2 days without pressing. He rode out alone on Friday morning, and it was a different experience. He noticed what was wrong because he had spent months learning to look, and he missed the particular quality of her assessments, which were direct in the way of someone who has decided facts are more useful than feelings. His mother found him at luncheon. "You told her," she said. "Is it that obvious? You rode out alone, you came back early. You are eating quickly and looking at the door." He looked at the door. "She's a thoughtful person," his mother said. "Give her the time." "I am giving her the time." "You are giving her the time while being very visible about it." She passed him the bread. "Eat properly and be patient." She came to the library that evening. He was there because it was where he went now when he was not in the study, and the library in the evening was where they had, incrementally, been most honest with each other. She came in and sat in the window seat. He put his book down. "I grew up," she said, "in a house where there was very little money and a great deal of love, and I understood from an early age that one does not compensate for the other." She looked at her hands. "I was educated to be capable because my father believed capability was the only reliable inheritance he could give me. I came here as a companion because it was a respectable position, and your mother was very kind in her letter." He waited. "I did not come here to become what I have become here." She looked up. "I did not plan it." "I know." "And I did not plan—" She stopped. "You." "Nor did I," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not a suitable match for the Duke of Wyndham."
Who told you that?
"Reason. Reason is frequently wrong about what is suitable." He turned to face her properly. "You have run this estate for 10 months. You know every tenant's name. You know where the fence is weakest, and which child was ill last winter, and how to write a letter that stops a quarrel before it starts. You are—" He stopped, said it. "You are exactly suited to this, to Wyndham. To me, I think." Her eyes were bright. She blinked once. "I am afraid," she said, "that you believe this now and will believe it differently in 5 years." "Do you think I will?" She looked at him for a long time, the way she looked at Tenants, reading for the fact beneath the presentation. "No," she said quietly, "I don't think you will." "Then?" She stood up from the window seat. She crossed the library. She stopped in front of him and looked up at him, and he was struck, not for the first time, but more forcibly than before, by how direct her gaze was and how much of her it contained. "Ask me properly," she said. He took her hand. His hand found hers with the naturalness of a habit they had not yet formed. "Harriet." He said her name the way she had said his, as though it had weight. "Will you marry me?" She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Yes, obviously yes." He laughed. He had not expected to laugh. She laughed too, briefly. It broke through the composure like light under a door. And then he kissed her, properly, and without thinking about it, and the library with its practical texts and its marginal notes was very still around them. His mother, informed the following morning at breakfast, received the news with a satisfaction so complete it bordered on the theatrical. "I'm very glad," she said, and buttered her toast with the energy of a woman who has accomplished something she set out to accomplish 10 months ago. "You knew," Nicholas said. "I suspected. There is a difference." She looked at Harriet, who was sitting with her tea and an expression still adjusting to the reality of the morning. "I suspected when I wrote the letter inviting you to stay. I was fairly certain by April. I was quite certain by June." "You might have said something," Harriet said. "My dear," the Duchess Dowager set down her toast. "If I had said something, Wyndham would have done the opposite out of stubbornness, and you would have refused out of principle, and we should all have been wretched." She looked between them. This way was better. Harriet looked at Nicholas. Nicholas looked at his mother. "You are a deeply alarming woman," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "Would you like more coffee?" He wrote to Harriet's father that afternoon, a long letter, direct and specific, which he showed her before he sent it. She read it and said nothing, but her expression as she read it was the one she had when she found his father's notes in the essay collection. Her father replied within the week, warmly and plainly, with a note in the margin of the second page addressed to Harriet. "He writes well. I like him for it." She showed it to Nicholas. He looked at it for a moment. "Your father?" "He says the same thing about everyone he approves of." She folded the letter. "He said it about you." He wrote also to Lord Carew. This letter was shorter than the previous one, and said without elaboration that the matter of Miss Colworth's position had been resolved, that he was engaged to marry her, and that he trusted Carew would convey this to whomever had been remarking on the situation in his hearing. He sealed it and sent it, and did not think about it again, which was, for Nicholas Hartley, a significant act of freedom. Carew's reply came 10 days later. It was warm, correct, and contained the faint surprise of a man whose prediction had not been borne out by events. It expressed every good wish. Several other letters followed over the autumn, some warm, some less so, some conspicuously silent. Nicholas noted them and returned to the apple orchard. They were married in September. The church was the village church, which had a leaking roof that Harriet had already arranged to have repaired, and the service was conducted without incident. The vicar performed it with more animation than was customary, possibly because every tenant of Wyndham Court was present, and the congregation was watching him closely. Thomas Croft was in the second pew. Joseph Marsh was there, paid in full and then some. Robert Weston came with his wife and 3 children, and sat with the look of a man without an outstanding problem, an expression Nicholas had not seen on his face before. Young Alderton in the third row nudged his neighbour when Harriet came in. Nicholas stood at the front of the church and watched her come down the aisle, and did not think about what she looked like. She was not trying to look like anything other than herself, but about what it was like to watch someone who moved through the world with that quality of purpose, and to know that the purpose included him now. She reached the front. She looked at him. "Hello," she said very quietly, not a greeting, something that meant, "Here we are then." "Hello," he said. The vicar began. They spent a fortnight in Bath, because Harriet had never been, and Nicholas had been too many times, which meant he could show her the things worth seeing, and they could agree about the things that were not. She liked the architecture. She liked the pump room for the social comedy of it. She liked the bookshop on Milsom Street so much that they went twice, and on the second visit she found a text on orchard management that she examined with the focus she gave to anything that might be useful. "We're on our honeymoon," he said. "I know." She turned a page. "It's a good text." He bought it for her. She carried it under her arm for the rest of the afternoon, and he walked beside her through Bath with the feeling of a man who has understood something fully for the first time and is not going to waste any more time not understanding it. In the evenings they ate at the hotel and talked, properly in the way they had begun to talk in the library, without the management of it, without the careful calibrations of 2 people in an ambiguous situation. She told him about her father's house, full of papers and arguments and very good conversation, and a cold draught no one had ever fixed. He told her about his father, which he had not spoken of to anyone in 2 years, the man who had written in margins and thought the estate mattered and died before Nicholas had been ready for him to. "I wasn't ready," he said. It was the 3rd evening at the hotel window, with Bath going about its business below them. "I left because I wasn't ready, for the estate, for the weight of it." "I know," she said. She said it accurately, which was better than kindly. "And instead of finding it when I returned, you found me." She looked at him. "Which is not the same thing." "No." He looked out at the street. "But I found the estate through you. That is not something I expected." She was quiet for a moment. "Your father's notes." "Yes." "You should know," she said, "that I spoke to him in a way in those first weeks. When I didn't know what to do with a decision, I went to the shelves and opened whichever volume seemed relevant, and usually there was something in the margin that helped." He had a clear sense of what the estate was for, he said. "What did he think it was for?" "People," she said. "He wrote the land serves the people on it in the margin of the 3rd essay. He'd underlined it." Nicholas was quiet. He had not read that far. "I thought you should know that," she said. He took her hand on the windowsill beside his. She turned her palm and held his hand back. They stayed like that for a while, with Bath going about its business below them, and said nothing further because nothing further was needed. They returned to Wyndham Court on the 1st of October. The Duchess Dowager received them in the entrance hall, with the air of a woman who has been entirely comfortable in their absence and has no intention of pretending otherwise. "The Southfield fence needs attention," she said by way of greeting. "I had Briggs look at it yesterday." "I saw it from the lane," Harriet said. "We'll send someone Monday." "Good." His mother kissed her cheek. "Welcome home." Nicholas watched his wife and his mother stand in the entrance hall of Wyndham Court, and thought that the word home had meant something abstract to him for 2 years, and now meant this. These specific women, this hall, the smell of beeswax, and the ledger on the study desk. The apple orchard restoration began that week. They started at the south end and worked through the worst of the growth with Briggs and 2 men from the village, who turned out to have opinions about apple trees that Briggs considered worth hearing. Harriet listened to all of them. Nicholas, whose opinions about apple trees were less developed, listened to Harriet. By the end of the first week, they had cleared 2/3 of the overgrowth and found 43 trees in varying degrees of survival. Some were beyond recovery. Most were not. "This one," Harriet said at the north end of the row, with her hand on the bark of the oldest tree, which was massive and misshapen and had a split in the main trunk that had healed badly 30 years ago. "It's the worst one," Nicholas said. "It's survived the longest," she said. He looked at the tree. "Do you think it can be saved?" She looked up through the remaining branches, and the October light came through them in a way that made a decision look easy. "Yes," she said, "with the right attention." He looked at her. "Then we'll give it the right attention." She smiled. The real one. The one she did not produce for general use. He had been cataloguing its appearances privately since July. The midsummer rent of 1812 was the first one they conducted together. Harriet sat at the table. Nicholas sat beside her. Not behind the desk, not at the head beside her, in the way of a man who has decided where he belongs and is not inclined to debate it. Thomas Croft came in. He looked at Harriet, he looked at Nicholas, he put his payment on the table. "Miss Colt," he stopped, corrected. "Your Grace." "Mr. Croft," Harriet said, "the east fence."
"Holding!"
"Good," she made the notation. "How is your son?" Croft sat with the air of a man conducting a familiar transaction. He answered the questions. He spoke to Harriet. He spoke to Nicholas, who asked about the horse and received a full account from someone who has come to expect informed questions. When Croft left, he nodded to both of them. A different nod than the year before, not the nod one gives a room. The nod one gives people. "Better," Nicholas said quietly. "Give him a year," Harriet said. "He'll be shaking your hand." "Your hand first," he said. She looked at him, and her expression did the thing it did when he said something she had not expected, which was one of his private satisfactions. "Probably," she agreed, and called for the next tenant. The estate accounts for 1812 closed in the black for the first time in 11 years. Nicholas noted this when he saw the figure and showed it to Harriet at the desk, and she looked at it and said, "The apple orchard will help next year once the first crop comes in," and turned to the next page. He looked at the back of her head. He thought about the library and the window seat and a June evening with the light going very slowly. "Harriet," he said. She looked up. "Nothing," he said. "I only wanted to nothing." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the ledger. "I know," she said. She did know. All the things he said halfway and left unfinished she understood. Not because she was completing his sentences, but because she was paying attention, genuine attention, the kind she gave to apple trees and fence lines and the third essay in the collection. Their daughter was born in August of 1813 and was named Eleanor after his mother, which made the Duchess Dowager serene in a new and intensified way for the remainder of that year. Eleanor was a difficult infant, opinionated and loud and resistant to schedule, and Harriet managed her with the same directness she applied to everything, which was not to say easily, but without losing herself in it. Nicholas discovered that he had strong feelings about infants, which had not previously been apparent to him. "She's very angry about everything," he said on the third night, looking at Eleanor, who was asleep and still appeared to disapprove of her circumstances. "She'll improve," Harriet said. She was sitting up in bed and looked tired in the specific way of someone who has done something difficult and is not going to make a performance of it. "They all do." "How do you know? You haven't had one before." "Neither have you." She looked at him. "But I have read about it." He laughed. He brought the lamp closer so she could see Eleanor's face, still disapproving in repose, and they sat together in the lamplight and looked at the small, furious person they had made. And it was not quiet. Eleanor was never quiet, even asleep. But it was in its own way the most peaceful thing he had ever done. Their son arrived 16 months later, named Charles, and was entirely mild and slept through everything which Harriet considered suspicious. "He's a good baby," Nicholas said. "He's too good," she said. "Something will emerge." "You're not going to let him simply be pleasant." "I'm waiting," she said, with the patience of a woman who has learned that things reveal themselves on their own schedule. Charles turned out to be extraordinarily good at figures, which emerged at age 4, and stubborn about everything else, which emerged slightly earlier. Harriet received both developments with the satisfaction of a correct prediction. The orchard produced its first crop in the autumn of 1813. Not large, not yet, but real apples from trees that had been written off, pressed into cider that the tenants received at Michaelmas and declared acceptable, which in Somerset meant excellent. Harriet walked the orchard in October with Eleanor on her hip, pointing at the trees, naming them as she named everything to Eleanor, who was not yet old enough to retain names, but seemed to receive the activity of being named at with approval. Nicholas came to find them. Eleanor, spotting him across the orchard, produced the sound that was her version of his name. He took her from Harriet, who rolled her shoulders and looked at the oldest tree, still standing, still producing, 3 apples where last year there had been none. "Told you," she said. "You tell me a great deal of things," he said. "And?" He looked at Eleanor, who was examining his cravat with suspicion, and at the orchard and at his wife, who was watching him with the expression that was not quite smiling but was in the same county as it. "And you're right about most of them," he said. "Most. The cold frames in April, you were wrong about those." "I was adjusting," she said. "That's different from wrong." "It isn't, though." She looked at him. He looked back. Eleanor grabbed a handful of his cravat and pulled. "Fine," Harriet said. "The cold frames, once." "I only needed the once," he said, and kissed her briefly over Eleanor's head, and Harriet made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was entirely pleased. The September rent of 1815 was the last one the Duchess Dowager attended from her corridor chair. She had not been well that summer. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, but the particular quieting of a woman who has spent her energies for a long time and is beginning to conserve them. She sat in the chair for the morning and listened to the sounds from the estate room, the transactions, the questions, the specific exchanges, and she embroidered, and when the last tenant had gone and the corridor was quiet, she put her embroidery down. Harriet came out of the estate room and found her. "All paid," Harriet said. "I know." The Duchess Dowager looked at her. "Sit with me a moment." Harriet sat on the chair beside her, placed there some months ago without discussion. "I am very satisfied," the Duchess Dowager said, "with how things have turned out." "I know you are," Harriet said. "You arranged most of it." "I wrote a letter," she said. "Everything else was yours." Harriet looked at her hands. "Not only mine." "No," she patted Harriet's hand. "Not only yours." Nicholas came out of the study and found them there, his wife and his mother in the corridor outside the estate room, the ledger under Harriet's arm, his mother's embroidery done for the day. "Finished?" he said. "All paid," Harriet said. He offered his mother his arm to help her up. She took it with the grace of a woman accepting assistance she is not quite ready to need. "Next quarter," she said, as she always did. "Next quarter," Harriet agreed, as she always answered. The Duchess Dowager lived another 4 years. She spent them in the garden and the morning room and the corridor chair on rent days, and she was present at Charles's first words, which were no and mine in quick succession, and she was present at Eleanor's first independent opinion about something, expressed at length and with force at age 3, and received by her grandmother with the serenity of confirmation. "She'll run something," the Duchess Dowager said of Eleanor. "She already runs the nursery," Nicholas said. "Yes." She looked at Eleanor, who was explaining something to Charles with authority. "Something larger. The last rent day in this account was the September of 1816, and it was unremarkable, which was exactly right. The tenants filed in. Thomas Croft, 67 now, with a son who had taken over the East Farm, came first as he always did. He shook Nicholas's hand, had been doing so since the spring of 1812, and he paid his rent to Harriet, had been doing so since the spring of 1811. And he answered the specific questions, and he went. Joseph Marsh was fully paid. Robert Weston's farm was turning a profit, as Harriet had said it would be. Young Alderton was no longer young and had 2 children of his own, and spoke to both of them with the ease of a man who has known people long enough to know them. The ledger was the third one. The first 2 were on the shelf in the study, filled and done. The third was in good condition because Harriet was careful with things that mattered, and the ink was dark and the entries level, and at the right corner of the table the old stain from previous men who had pressed too hard remained. Harriet did not press too hard. When the last tenant had gone, she closed the ledger and sat for a moment in the quiet. Nicholas was in the doorway. She looked at him. He looked at the table, at the ledger, at her. "Well," he said. "All paid," she said. He came into the room. He sat in the chair beside the desk. the chair he had taken 3 years ago beside and not behind, and she pushed the ledger toward him, and he opened it and read the quarter's figures, which were good. He turned to the last entry, then to the page before and the page before that, back through the 3 months, through the names and the notations and the occasional note in her hand about what needed doing. He closed the ledger. He looked at her across the rent table, in the room where she had been sitting before he came home, and where she had been sitting when he did. "Same time next quarter," he said. She smiled, the real one. "Same time next quarter," she agreed. He put his hand over hers on the cover of the ledger. She turned her palm and held it. Outside the estate room in the corridor, the chair was empty. The house was quiet, and in the kitchen garden and the south fields and the lane to the village and the orchard at the western boundary where 43 trees stood in the October light, the whole of Wyndham Court went about its ordinary, well-managed, entirely